So, I want you to imagine waking up and the lower half of your body is just completely paralyzed. You can't move your legs.
Right.
You can't feel the floor beneath your feet at all. But somehow, your legs feel like they are quite literally on fire, like 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
It's just this impossible, agonizing paradox.
Right.
Because, I mean, how can you feel a burning, crushing pain in a part of your body that has zero feeling?
It's honestly one of the most frustrating, profound mysteries in neurology today. And that's actually what we're looking at in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're exploring a potential solution that sounds like it was pulled straight out of a science fiction novel. We're looking at a 2025 systematic review from the Journal of Spinal Cord Medicine.
Right, and the central question here is whether we can use robotic-assisted gait training, right?
Exactly.
Which essentially means taking a paralyzed patient, strapping them into a high-tech motorized exoskeleton, and seeing if that can, eliminate that phantom burning nerve pain.
Yeah, we are taking a deep dive into 32 different studies here. It involves about 567 participants in total.
That's a lot of data.
It is. And they're all aiming to find a high-tech solution to this incredibly stubborn medical problem. But, and I mean, this is a monumental but, the data we are going to look at today contains this massive record scratch moment.
Oh, man, it really does.
It's a revelation that is honestly going to change how you view scientific studies and, how you read clinical trial headlines from now on.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even talk about, strapping someone into an Iron Man suit, we have to understand the physical reality of the condition we're trying to treat here.
Right, the baseline reality.
Yeah, like if you've never dealt with nerve pain, you might just assume it's like, I don't know, a really bad muscle cramp. But it's not, is it?
Not at all. I mean, when most of us think of a spinal cord injury or SCI, the immediate assumption is that the primary tragedy is just the loss of motor function, paralysis.
Right.
But there is this completely hidden epidemic within this population, and that is chronic pain. The review actually notes that up to 61% of people with an SCI experience pain.
Wow, 61%?
Yeah, and within that group, 53% specifically suffer from neuropathic pain, or NP.
So what exactly is the difference there? Because I feel like to a layperson, pain is just pain.
Right, yeah, let's break down the mechanics of it. So nociceptive pain, that's the normal kind of pain.
Okay.
It's what happens when you touch a hot stove or if you sprain your ankle. The tissue is physically damaged, and the healthy nerves in your hand or your ankle send this functional warning signal up to your brain.
Saying like, hey, pull back, you're hurt.
Exactly. But neuropathic pain is entirely different. It's actually caused by a lesion or a disease to the somatosensory nervous system itself.
So the system is broken.
Yes, exactly. The physical tissue in the leg might be perfectly healthy. There's no burn, no cut, but the communication system is completely shattered. And in the case of a spinal cord injury, this neuropathic pain occurs below the level of the injury. We actually see it more commonly in patients with tetraplegia, so paralysis of all four limbs, and the torso.
And it doesn't just go away, right?
No, it typically sets in about a year post-injury. And honestly, the cruelest part of this whole condition is that it frequently becomes chronic, lifelong.
The impact that must have on a person's life. I mean, reading the review, it's just staggering. It highlights that this specific neuropathic pain causes massive debilitating interference with sleep.
Oh, absolutely ruins it.
It completely ruins daily activity. It severely tanks what researchers measure as health-related quality of life, or HRQOL.
Right.
Like, people living with this frequently describe the pain, not the paralysis, but the pain as their most persistent unmet health issue.
Exactly. It just dominates their entire existence. And the standard medical response for this right now, unfortunately, is pharmacotherapy.
So just pills.
Pills, yeah. Doctors prescribe these heavy medications. Primarily, they're using anticonvulsants and antidepressants that have been repurposed. They're trying to just calm the nervous system down.
But they don't really work, do they?
No, the tragic reality of these chemical interventions is that they're failing profoundly. I mean, these drugs fail to help 2/3 of the people taking them.
2/3? That's awful.
Yeah, for a massive portion of these patients, the severe pain just remains completely refractory, resistant to the medication.
And from what I understand, even when the pills do manage to take the edge off, the side effects are absolutely brutal.
Oh, they are intolerable.
Like, the review mentions severe effects on the central nervous system. We're talking about overwhelming brain fog, dizziness, like extreme lethargy.
Yeah, it basically creates a state where the patients feel entirely sedated, but the pain is still somehow there underneath it all.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is. It's so intolerable that it leads to what the medical community calls medication fear and non-compliance.
Meaning they just stop taking them.
Right. Patients actively choose to stop taking their pills because the chemical cure feels as bad, if not worse, than the disease itself.
You know, the best analogy I can think of to explain what's happening in the body here is imagine a house where the main electrical wiring has just been completely cut.
Okay, I like this.
So the power to the house is severed. But for some inexplicable reason, the fire alarm in the hallway is just continually blaring anyway.
Right, yeah.
Like at full volume, day and night, even though the wire is cut.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize the mechanics of it. Because that main wire, the spinal cord, is cut, the systems in the brain and the remaining spinal cord just start behaving erratically.
They don't know what to do.
Exactly. Without normal input, the system basically panics. The researchers describe this using two very specific terms. First is neuronal hyperexcitability.
Which means what exactly?
It literally means the nerve cells are firing out of control in this panicked loop. And the second term is maladaptive neuroplasticity.
Wait, neuroplasticity is usually a positive buzzword, right?
Right.
Like that's how our brains learn new languages or how people recover from strokes.
Yes. Normally, neuroplasticity is just the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience. But here, it is maladaptive. It's rewiring itself the wrong way.
Oh, I see.
Specifically, the brain's sensory relay station, the corticothalamic pathways, is no longer receiving normal touch or movement signals from the paralyzed body.
Because the wire is cut.
Right, so starved of real data, that brain map degrades and rewires itself negatively. It essentially hallucinates pain to fill the void.
So the fire alarm is blaring, but there's no fire. The control panel is just completely broken.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see why researchers are absolutely desperate for non-pharmacological interventions.
Right, because the drugs aren't working.
Chemical interventions are failing to turn off that alarm. They're just sedating the entire house. So researchers had to look for a completely different angle.
Okay, so if a chemical disruption isn't fixing the switchboard, what about a mechanical disruption?
Yes, exactly.
And what if the intense physical act of movement could somehow force the brain to rewire itself back to normal and actually turn the alarm off?
Which brings us to the intervention itself. And as you said earlier, it really does sound like pure science fiction.
It really does. So let's talk about the robotic-assisted gait training, or RAGT hypothesis. Tell me about this machinery. Like, how exactly does an exoskeleton work?
It is genuinely remarkable, pinnacle of modern engineering type technology. RAGT utilizes these robotic exoskeletons to physically move a paralyzed patient.
Okay.
In the 32 studies they reviewed, they're looking at devices with names like the Lokomat, the Exo, and the Rewalk.
So what does it actually look and feel like to be in one of these things?
Well, the Lokomat, for instance, is this massive treadmill system. The patient is suspended in a harness over the treadmill to support their body weight, and their legs are strapped into these robotic motorized braces.
Wow.
The machine then physically drives the hips and knees, literally forcing the paralyzed legs to walk in a mathematically perfect human gait.
That's incredible.
And others, like the Exo and Rewalk, are overground exoskeletons. These are actual wearable robotic suits.
Oh, like actual Iron Man stuff.
Pretty much. The patient straps the mechanical legs onto their own, they use crutches for balance, and motors at the hips and knees power the movement. It allows a paralyzed person to literally stand up and walk across a room.
Okay, but if you were going through this therapy, you'd be making a pretty serious time commitment, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because the review notes the average training program across these studies was about 7.7 weeks long.
Yeah.
Participants were doing around 25 sessions, and each session lasted about 50 minutes. Like, this is intense, grueling physical therapy.
Very intense.
But what is the actual biological mechanism here? Like, I understand the metaphor of the broken alarm, but how does strapping into a robot and moving legs that you can't even feel actually stop the nerve pain?
To understand the mechanism, we really have to look at where the theory came from. It's actually borrowed from research into phantom limb pain.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so when an amputee experiences severe pain in a leg that has been surgically removed, it's because the brain's map of that leg in the somatosensory cortex is starved of input and becomes dysfunctional.
So it's that same maladaptive neuroplasticity we just talked about.
Exactly. But researchers discovered years ago that if you can trick the brain into, seeing or feeling the missing limb move, often by using mirrors to reflect the intact limb or using virtual reality.
Oh, wow.
The brain receives that visual sensory input, the map normalizes, and the pain actually stops.
Wait, let me see if I can extend that fire alarm metaphor then.
Go for it.
So the physical sensation of the robot forcing your feet to strike the ground, that sends a massive jolt of normal sensory data back up the spinal cord, right? Like weight, joint position, muscle stretch.
Yes.
And so it acts like a system reboot. It forces a new signal up the wire that finally tells the brain's control panel, hey, there's no fire down here. We're just walking. You can shut the alarm off.
Precisely. By using these robotic exoskeletons to provide massive sensoromotor stimulation, the hope is to reverse that cortical dysfunction. The mechanical act of walking could literally force the brain to heal its own broken map.
Okay, wait. Let me stop you there and push back on this timeline a bit.
Sure.
Because something just doesn't make sense to me. If these exoskeletons are already widely used in rehab centers we know they're used right now to help SCI patients with cardiovascular fitness.
Right, they are.
They help preserve bone density. They even improve bladder and bowel function. If patients have been strapping into these robots for years to stay physically fit, why does this 2025 review call using them for pain a nascent or emerging field?
That's a great question.
Like, why are we just now figuring out this connection?
Because the medical field often operates in very strict silos. In clinical settings, the focus of exoskeleton therapy has historically been intensely exclusively physical.
Oh, I see.
Physical therapists and rehab researchers have been laser-focused on gait recovery, meaning, can the patient learn to walk better? And those secondary physical fitness metrics you just mentioned.
So they weren't even looking at the neurological pain.
Exactly. The pain metrics were largely ignored in the context of robotic therapy. It was just assumed that neuropathic pain was a completely separate neurological issue for the pain clinic to deal with using pills.
Wow.
They didn't think it was something the physical rehab department could treat on a treadmill. So while early preclinical studies hinted at this neurological benefit, nobody was really rigorously tracking the pain data in the massive, expensive clinical trials.
Until now. Until this systematic review finally decided to crunch the numbers.
Right.
I mean, we have this biologically brilliant theory based on proven phantom limb science. We have millions of dollars of perfectly functioning robotic technology.
We do.
We have a pool of 567 patients across 32 studies. So what happens when the reviewers finally lay out all this data and look for the pain reduction?
This is where we hit that record scratch moment.
Brace yourselves.
To get to the absolute highest level of scientific truth, the reviewers naturally looked at the gold standard studies. Out of 18,430 initial records identified in their literature search, only 32 studies met all the strict criteria to be included.
Okay.
And out of those 32, only 6 were randomized controlled trials, or RCTs.
Just to clarify for anyone who, doesn't spend their days reading medical journals, a randomized controlled trial is the pinnacle of evidence, right?
Yes.
Like you have a control group, you have an intervention group, you compare the two to completely eliminate bias.
Exactly. It is the gold standard for proving if a treatment actually works. And when the reviewers ran the meta-analysis on those 6 RCTs to see the effect of robotic gait training on overall pain intensity, the result was 0.
Wait, 0? As in it didn't work at all?
0 effect. The RAGT showed absolutely no significant difference whatsoever over the standard therapy.
Are you serious?
And by standard therapies, we mean control groups doing basic physical therapy on a mat, stretching, or conventional overground walking with plastic braces.
Oh my God.
The standardized mean difference for overall pain was just 0.03 with a p-value of 0.90.
Okay, you have to translate that for me. What does a p-value of 0.90 actually mean in the real world?
Right, so a p-value is basically a measure of probability. A p-value of 0.90 essentially means there is a 90% chance that any difference they saw between the groups was just random noise.
Wow.
It is the statistical equivalent of a shrug. It means the intervention did nothing measurable.
That is just devastating.
It gets worse. It wasn't just overall pain intensity that flatlined. The data showed no significant difference for non-specified pain.
Okay.
No difference for pain interference, which measures how much the pain actually stops you from living your life.
Right.
And no difference for overall quality of life. Furthermore, they use something called the grade criteria, which is a rigorous system used to rate the overall confidence in a body of evidence.
Then what did that show?
The certainty of this evidence was rated as very low. And to top it all off, 23 of the total 32 studies were rated as having a high risk of bias.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because I am completely baffled right now.
It's confusing, I know.
The theory is practically flawless. It works for amputees. The machines themselves are mechanical marvels that do exactly what they're programmed to do.
Yeah.
But the gold standard data says that strapping someone into a multi-million-dollar exoskeleton is mathematically no better for their nerve pain than just laying on a mat and having a therapist stretch their legs.
That's what the data says.
Did the robots malfunction? Does the theory actually not work, or is this data somehow lying to us?
This raises an important question, and it's honestly the crux of the entire review. The theory is biologically sound.
Okay.
The machines function perfectly. The problem is a fundamental, almost unbelievable flaw in how these clinical trials were designed in the first place.
I'm almost afraid to ask, what did they do wrong?
Remember that these are randomized controlled trials. They are incredibly expensive and complex to run. But of all the RCTs analyzed in this meta-analysis, not a single one of them mandated pain as an inclusion criterion.
Wait, let me make sure I'm hearing you correctly. They were testing to see if a treatment reduced pain on people who didn't necessarily have any pain to begin with.
Exactly. Across the 32 total studies, 30 of them did not specifically recruit participants who were actually suffering from pain.
You've got to be kidding me.
No, I'm serious. The researchers were simply taking a mathematical average of everyone's pain scores in the trial.
Okay, walk me through how that skews the numbers.
So picture a study with 20 paralyzed people. Because they were recruited for gait recovery, maybe 15 of them start the study with zeo pain or very mild pain.
Right.
Only 5 of them actually have severe blaring neuropathic pain. The average starting score for the whole group is already quite low.
Okay, I see where this is going.
When you run the intervention, even if those 5 people experience a miraculous total elimination of their agonizing nerve pain, it gets completely washed out.
Because you're averaging it with the 15 people whose pain couldn't drop because it was already at 0.
Exactly. The final data looks like a flat line.
That is mind-blowing. I mean, you can't prove a headache pill works if you only test it on people who don't have a headache.
Exactly.
How does a blind spot this massive happen in gold standard multi-million-dollar science?
It goes right back to the siloed nature of the research we discussed. These clinical trials were designed, funded, and executed to test gait recovery. The researchers were recruiting people based entirely on their spinal cord injury level and whether they physically fit into the robot.
So pain was just an afterthought.
Exactly. Pain was just tacked on as a secondary outcome measure. They essentially handed out a questionnaire at the beginning and the end of the study that said, oh, by the way, how is your pain today?
Unbelievable.
Because pain wasn't the primary focus, they didn't control for it at the start. It led to heavily diluted, fundamentally flawed data regarding this specific neurological question.
Wow.
In fact, out of the hundreds of patients in these 32 studies, only 7 studies reported an average of moderate to severe pain at baseline, and only 2 small case studies actually specifically recruited patients seeking treatment for neuropathic pain.
It's a classic case of bad data design.
Yeah.
It's like looking at a blurry, out-of-focus photograph of a face and confidently concluding in a scientific journal that the person in the picture doesn't have a nose.
That's a great analogy.
The nose is absolutely there. Your camera's just out of focus.
That is exactly what happened. The data itself isn't lying, but it is answering an entirely different question than the one we are asking.
Right.
The data is answering, does robotic training reduce pain in the general spinal cord injury population, the vast majority of whom don't have severe pain? The answer to that is obviously no.
Because they don't have the pain to begin with.
But what we desperately want to know is if it reduces pain in the specific individuals whose lives are being ruined by it.
And this completely changes how you should read the news.
Right.
The next time you see a headline saying, science proves diet X doesn't work or new medical therapy fails, you really have to stop and ask, who exactly did they test it on?
You really do.
This review proves that perfectly executed gold standard science can still produce an entirely false reality if you just design the question poorly.
Absolutely.
So once we adjust the focus on the camera, once we strip away all that heavily diluted data and only look at the studies that actually bothered to test the headache pill on people with headaches, what do we actually see?
Well, when you isolate the studies that specifically recruited people suffering from moderate to severe neuropathic pain, the true potential of these robotic exoskeletons is finally revealed.
Okay, let's hear the good news.
Let's look at a 2016 case study by Krusiger and colleagues. They focused the camera. They used the HAL exoskeleton, the hybrid assistive limb, for a 12-week program.
Yep.
They specifically recruited 2 participants who were suffering from chronic, severe neuropathic pain. After the 12 weeks, one of those participants saw their neuropathic pain intensity drop from a 6.5 out of 10 all the way down to a 0.6 out of 10.
Wait, from a 6.5 down to a 0.6.
Yes.
We have to pause and just appreciate that. That isn't just a statistical blip or like a rounding error. A 5.9-point reduction on a 10-point pain scale is massive.
It's incredible.
That is the very definition of clinically meaningful. That's the difference between I am in agony and I can't even concentrate on a conversation to I barely even notice it.
It is completely life-altering for the patient. And it wasn't an isolated incident either.
Cool.
Look at a 2014 case series by Kressler and colleagues. They used the EXO device for just 6 weeks. They actively recruited 3 participants with moderate to severe neuropathic pain.
And what happened?
2 out of those 3 participants saw significant 2 to 5-point reductions in their pain intensity.
Wow.
But perhaps even more importantly, they reported major drops in sleep interference. The pain had been turned down enough that it was no longer waking them up in the middle of the night.
Which, if you've ever dealt with chronic pain, you know that getting your sleep back is literally the first step to getting your sanity back.
100%.
And it isn't just the hard numbers either. I saw there were some qualitative studies in this review too, where they just, talk to the patients.
Yes, studies by Cahill in 2018 and Charbonneau in 2021 utilized qualitative interviews. They sat down and just asked the patients to describe their experience.
Right.
And in those interviews, patients subjectively reported clear, undeniable reductions in their pain after using the exoskeleton. They physically felt the alarm turning off.
So what does this all mean? We have this incredible proof of concept. The system reboot works. The fire alarm is finally getting shut off without having to flood the house with sedatives.
Right.
But earlier, we talked about the hierarchy of evidence. Those successful examples you just gave are from case studies and qualitative interviews.
Yes, they are.
That is considered level 4 evidence, which is pretty low on the scientific ladder compared to those big, rigorous, randomized controlled trials.
It is.
Can you really justify to a healthcare system or a stingy insurance company that they need to fund these multi-million-dollar machines based just on level 4 case studies?
What's fascinating here is how the authors of the systematic review land on this exact dilemma. Their final conclusion is essentially an urgent call to action to the entire scientific community.
Okay, what are they calling for?
They admit we cannot honestly justify widespread, pain-specific funding based only on level 4 case studies. The meta-analysis, heavily flawed as it is, officially sits in the literature saying there is no effect.
Right.
But the case studies provide incredibly promising proof of concept. They prove that the biological mechanism that neuroplastic rewiring can work.
So what's the next step?
What we urgently need now are new, rigorously designed, randomized controlled trials. We need RCTs that are built correctly from day one.
Meaning they recruit the right people.
Exactly. They must specifically and exclusively recruit spinal cord injury patients who actually have moderate to severe neuropathic pain at baseline. We have to test the intervention on the target population to prove the concept at the highest level of evidence.
It's a phenomenal takeaway. For you listening, this deep dive really leaves us with 2 massive paradigm-shifting points.
Yeah.
First, just the sheer incredible promise of the technology itself. The idea that we can use mechanical exoskeletons to literally force neuroplasticity.
It's amazing.
To reboot the brain's sensory map and turn off chronic, agonizing nerve pain just by simulating the physical act of walking. That is a beautiful application of engineering.
Truly.
But secondly, and maybe even more importantly for your day-to-day life, it is a masterclass in why you must always look critically at data.
Absolutely.
A failed scientific study might just be a perfectly executed study that was answering the completely wrong question.
Exactly. The methodology of a study is just as important as the mechanism of the treatment. If you don't carefully control for the baseline condition you are actually trying to treat, your resulting data will always be a meaningless illusion.
It really makes you wonder about what is coming next on the horizon of treatment. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today.
Let's hear it.
If mechanical movement
Just the simulated robotic act of forcing a perfect human stride has the power to reverse deep-seated cortical dysfunction and eliminate chronic nerve pain that the most powerful drugs on Earth cannot touch.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the future of medicine? Are we entering an entirely new era where the most potent, life-changing painkillers won't be something we swallow in a pill, but a robotic suit we wear that literally teaches the brain how to heal itself?
That's a powerful thought.
Something to think about.